Welcome to the studio with Kristoff Malejczuk. This episode is not being recorded out of my rented duplex in Boulder, Colorado, and that is because I no longer have a rented duplex in Boulder, Colorado. That's right, I have moved. I am now on the third story of a historic building. Boulder has very few tall buildings. 3 stories for Boulder is pretty high. I have a view of the Flatirons in this historic building. It was a place where wealthy people used to live. They turned it into an apartment complex. I have one of 3 flats on the 3rd floor. And there's just a bit of a scent in the air, the scent that wealth used to float around here. And now that I'm living here, wealth is floating around here once again. Isn't that nice? So much has happened since the last episode. The Olympics happened. They came. They happened. They went. No one cared. Wasn't that interesting? No one cared about the Olympics this year, myself included. My mom visited me. I recorded an episode 2 weeks ago. Half of the audio got deleted. I don't know how, probably because I was being a clown. I realized halfway through editing, I do a couple edits. I don't want to be spreading misinformation. If I make an obscenely long pause as I'm thinking of something precise to say, I don't want to bore you with that silence. As I was halfway through the editing, I realized, the final 20 minutes are missing. The final 20 minutes are missing. See, I didn't even edit that out. And that was unfortunate. And then I moved. I moved last weekend, and now I'm in my new spot, my new crib, my new home. Because I'm turning this apartment into a home. Today I bought some nice shower curtains. I've actually been having baths since I moved in. Do you know how nice it is to have a bath? The last time I had a bath before this, over a year ago. Definitely over a year. I don't know when, maybe 2 years ago, but definitely over a year ago. And now I was forced to have baths because I moved into a place that didn't have a shower curtain. And this is a blessing because not only did I get to rediscover how nice a bath is, I also got to pick out some custom designs of shower curtain that speaks to who I am. It's a nice paisley pattern. It doesn't really speak to who I am, but I have this personalized bathroom now. I'm giving this place character. I bought a lamp. I bought a $150 lamp for my living room. The light it casts is beautiful. Yesterday, I had the window open, the window that faces the Flatirons. It was in the evening. I was in my room. I was there for about an hour just chilling in my bed. I come back into the living room. My beautiful lamp was on the whole time. And I see that there are tens and tens and tens and tens of insects which had flown through the open window and were hanging out around the lamp because they too appreciated the beauty of the glow. Since the last episode, so much has happened. The Olympics happened. A couple stories stood out to me. Actually, this is how irrelevant the Olympics are. It's only 1 month since they happened, and you're most likely finding it incredibly irrelevant that I'm even talking about them. And you're right, it is irrelevant that I'm talking about it. This is past news. If the Olympics actually mattered, you would find it exciting that I'm talking about them now. There are a lot of events throughout history that people remember and talk about, even years and years later. There are boxing matches when Ali fought in Africa. Who did he fight? I think that was when he did rope-a-dope against George Foreman. I might be wrong, but I think it was his fight in Africa. He invented the rope-a-dope. He was a huge underdog, and he ended up winning, I think, an 8th round knockout. I've actually never watched that fight. I should watch that fight. That's a fight one should watch. I've watched a bunch of Ali fights. Man, was he good. He was really good before he went to jail. After he went to jail, he was, of course, still very good, but he just wasn't quite the same. He didn't have the spring in his step. He wasn't floating like a butterfly and stinging like a bee. He was stinging like a bee, but he was also getting stung, and he had an incredible chin. He just wouldn't get knocked out. And that's why he was able to do rope-a-dope against George Foreman. He was able to do rope-a-dope against George Foreman because he had a formidable chin. And that's why we still talk about that. That's not why we talk about the event. The event was historic for more reasons than just the invention of rope-a-dope. But that event that happened in, I don't know, the 70s, the 80s? I'm not sure. I don't have a producer to look this up for me. I think, well, definitely in one of those 2 decades. You can look it up a long time ago, 40 or 50 years ago. And we still talk about it now because it mattered. It was historic. You know something else that we still talk about now? Oh, also, before I conclude on that, I'm not sure if Ali actually went to jail. He refused to go to Vietnam. He refused to fight in the war. And he definitely got into some trouble surrounding that. I don't know if he was actually in jail. But post his suspension, he was suspended from boxing for 3 years. He just wasn't the same. Okay, now here's another event that was actually significant that happened a long time ago and that we still talk about today. 9/11. We still talk about 9/11 today. It was an event that had significance. The Olympics happened. The Olympics happened last month. And we don't talk about it anymore. Some Olympics were tremendous. The Olympics where Usain Bolt rose to prominence and broke the world record. That was a significant event. I can talk about that today. And people still care because that was an incredible moment. He was an incredible athlete that gripped the minds of the masses. This past Olympics, no one cared. One of the events that stood out to me, the Norwegian women's beach handball team was fined for not adhering to uniform requirements. They wore tight-fitting spandex shorts that cut off in their mid or upper thigh region. However, per the European rules for handball attire, women must wear bikini bottoms. So the Norwegian women's team refused to adhere to the attire requirements, and they were fined for it. The fine was very little money, but it's the principle that matters. I was truly outraged by this. They chose to wear shorts, something that is equally contributing to high performance. They're not obstructive to movement in any way. Instead of wearing bikini bottoms, which one could say is very sexualizing. One could say that. This outraged me. This absolutely outraged me to learn that beach handball is an Olympic sport. Is it also ridiculous and possibly quite sexist that is the attire requirement? Yes, but more outrageous. That's an Olympic sport. That's why the Olympics are irrelevant. They're bringing all these events that 3 people around the world care about just so their eyes are glued to the TV for a span of, 1 hour over the course of the 20 days that the Olympics goes on for. Same deal, they added rock climbing. I have a bunch of friends who are into rock climbing. They were glued to the TV for those events, and no one cares about rock climbing. They didn't care. The people who cared about rock climbing didn't care about anything else. The Olympics is pandering to people. It's not about athletic prowess anymore. It's about the IOC raking in cash. Was it a great idea for Japan in their current state of health, of public health, to be hosting an international event? That makes sense? No. Oh, the IOC loved that idea. And the IOC loves beach handball. The IOC loves a lot of insane sports. Sports that don't matter. That's not quite true, though. The IOC doesn't love these sports. They love the money that they can bring in from the fans of these niche sports. That's what they love. Here's another piece of news. Simone Biles, who to my uneducated understanding is one of the greatest gymnasts to have ever lived, regardless of gender. So Simone Biles doesn't compete in all of her events. A bit of a letdown for those around the world who are wanting to see her sheer excellency on display. That's all right, though. She had some family issues which led to her feeling mentally unprepared, and from my understanding, the mental unpreparedness led to her not even being able to safely perform her physical stunts. So that was a bit unfortunate. There was also an American sprinter named Sha'Carri Richardson. She qualified for the Olympics in the American Olympic trials, and then she tested positive. She failed a drug test. She had marijuana metabolites in her system. That's a no-no. You can't compete at the Olympics if you consume cannabis. That makes sense. Now, despite the irrelevance of the Olympics. These events have actually inspired me. They've inspired my Halloween costume for this year. This year for Halloween, I'm going to go out as a cross between Sha'Carri Richardson and Simone Biles. I'm going to get high, go out, then leave halfway through. And I'm doing this because I support both athletes. I'm not making fun of them. I'm standing in solidarity with them. I support them both. Interesting news. I was on the phone with my grandmother. She was telling me that she might get an internet connection solely, maybe not solely, but in part to listen to the studio. She knows I have a podcast because I talk to her about once a month, and she asks me what's going on, and I just, to tell her what's going on with my life, I told her I had this podcast, and I didn't really expect her to know what it was all about, but because my grandmother watches the news and they talk about podcasts. Every news station has podcasts, so she's aware of the deal. So she thinks that she might get an internet connection, which she does not currently have, in order to listen to the studio. Now that's very flattering, and I encourage her to do that, but what she's maybe not fully aware of is that I talk about drugs in almost every episode. Not that I consume the drugs in every episode, just that I talk about drugs in a normalizing way. Because I want to normalize the consumption of drugs. That's a goal that I have. I don't want to demonize the consumption of alcohol, although alcohol is quite harmful, or can be quite harmful. But I do want to normalize the consumption of drugs. I want people to realize that alcohol is a drug. And oh boy, alcohol is a hell of a drug. I had that realization quite recently. I believe it was 2 weekends ago. Yes, it was 2 weekends ago. And to be more precise, it wasn't a realization, it was a reminder. Because I knew this. I didn't learn anything new. I was just refreshed. My memory was refreshed. Just like what happened recently with the Taliban. Everyone knows that the Taliban is bad. We didn't come to the realization just now that the Taliban was bad, but we've all been given a reminder the Taliban is bad. So I knew that alcohol was a hell of a drug, but I was reminded that alcohol was a hell of a drug. I went out. I drink regularly, but I don't drink much, not in a single sitting. Yes, I enjoy a couple glasses of red wine, maybe a nice German wheat beer, a Belgian beer. Those wet my palate very nicely. But I don't drink too much in a single sitting. 2 weeks ago, on the weekend, for the first time in a long time, let me put it this way, I drank more than the quantity that a chauffeur should consume. Now, this was okay because I was by no means a chauffeur. I wasn't within 2 meters of a car the entire night. So I had too much alcohol to even think about driving. Was I drunk? Drunk's a big word. Was I sober? No. So I'm with a group of people. We go out. I'm having a good time. I feel good. I'm jovial. I'm content. I'm gregarious. I'm hopefully amicable. I was definitely amicable. I was hopefully likable. I think so. We were in a line to get into this establishment. I turn around to the people behind us and I say, hey, I single out one of the people. It's a group of 5 or so people. I single out one of the people, one of the men. And I say, hey, excuse me. I don't think I said excuse me. I said, hey, are you a patriot? He looks at me, he says, what? I say, are you a patriot? The guy says, man, I'm Brazilian. I'm not sure if that's exactly how he sounded, but it's pretty close. It's how he sounded to me. He said, man, I'm Brazilian. I said, okay, man, I'm not American either. I'm still a patriot. Are you a patriot? He was like, man, I am a patriot. I was like, yes, dude. So I made a friend. I made a friend in line. His name is Marcus. Never saw him again. Never talked to him again. But we We're both patriots. That's something that I've been finding a lot of fun recently. It's not a good habit, but it's fun. Is to be branding people or situations as patriotic or unpatriotic. Because recently, in the US, patriot has taken on a different meaning. About 6 months ago, I was thinking a lot about whether or not I should be proud to be Canadian. I actually discussed this a bit in episode 5. It's a good episode. It's about skiing. It's about how you can probably achieve the same state of thrill that you achieve in skiing, but through meditation. Skiing is a cheap thrill. I like the episode. Near the end of the episode, I was talking about something I was grappling with in my head, and that was about whether one should be proud to be of a certain nationality. And this was a struggle for me. What I settled on at that time is that one should be grateful instead of proud. Because pride is a sin. We've known that for 2,000 years, or at least Christians have, and I think Jews and Muslims have as well. I think all the Abrahamic religions, you can fact check me on that. I'm not a super expert in Abrahamic religions, but I think all Abrahamic religions have the same deadly sins. I could be wrong about that. Regardless, we've known for a long time that pride is a sin. We're taught to be proud of our country. That's a bit backwards. Regardless, I settled on being grateful instead of being proud. So I wouldn't go around saying that I'm a patriot. I don't like labels that much. But recently, I've been really liking to apply labels. In particular, the label of patriot. I find it very fun to apply because now patriot, its new definition in the US, the definition it's taking on culturally, is of someone who likes their freedom, and not just freedom in a generic sense, but their freedom to not wear a mask, their freedom to not get vaccinated. Those are now the patriots, those who are maybe a bit anti-vax, a bit against the restrictions that the pandemic is imposing, or more specifically that the government is imposing as a result of the pandemic. Those are people who self-describe as patriots and are also described by others as patriots. So the word patriot is now being used as a badge of honor by those who identify with it, and then as almost a slur by those who do not like their values or behavior. So I have come to really enjoy labeling things, people, as patriots or not being patriots. I was at a liquor store the other day. I went there to pick up a nice bottle of wine, and masks were optional but recommended. There was a sign on the door saying, please wear a mask, but it wasn't enforced. It wasn't the rule of the establishment, and it's not the rule of the municipal government either. I was looking around the store, and I see some people wearing masks, not patriots, and I see some people not wearing masks. Those are the patriots. And I found it fun. I found it fun to label those people as patriots. Now, I, at the time, was wearing a mask, and that meant that in that situation, I was not a patriot. And because of this labeling scheme, this fun but irresponsible labeling scheme that I have concocted, me not being a patriot meant that I was weak and I was a loser in that situation. Now, did I continue my unpatriotic ways, in huge quotations around unpatriotic, by wearing a mask in the establishment? Yes, but every time I walked by someone who wasn't wearing a mask, I thought, you're a patriot. So then I went outside of the establishment and I removed my mask, and suddenly I was a patriot. And I would see some people outside wearing masks, and they were not patriots. They were below me. And this is really bad because in this game, at the top of this imagined hierarchy are the patriots. They don't care what you say, and they're not going to change their actions based on some unofficial rules. They're at the top. Then as you get more socially responsible, you get lower and lower down the hierarchy. Now this fictitious hierarchical structure that I have created in my brain is not only toxic, but it is harmful because it is punishing the more selfless behavior by labeling it as being lesser than the more selfish, potentially more dangerous behavior. This is bad, this is harmful, this is toxic. This is not a good way to conceive of society. However, It is extremely fun. It is extremely fun to be with a group of friends. Maybe you get out of a movie theater, and then you take your mask off, and then you say, I'm a patriot. It's fun. It's a fun game. So I don't encourage you to play it. I hardly have a point with this other than to say that I am getting immense pleasure out of dividing society into a binary of patriots and non-patriots based solely on how they are handling matters of public health. So once I had gleaned that my new Brazilian connection, Marcus, was a country-loving, God-fearing patriot, I went in the establishment and had a great time, danced a little, I can tear up a rug, continued to drink a little, then went home. Had a great evening. Were my perceptions somewhat altered by the consumption of alcohol? Yes. Obviously, alcohol is a drug, and not a particularly soft drug at that. I would even verge to toss it in the category of hard drugs. Maybe not the hardest of drugs. I mean, maybe a bit lower on the scale than cocaine and heroin and fentanyl, but definitely higher than cannabis, possibly higher than psilocybin, probably lower than MDMA, probably lower than LSD. Okay, maybe it's a bit nearer the bottom of the totem pole. But I don't know. There are a lot of prescription drugs that are maybe a bit less hard than alcohol. I mean, you take a bit of Xanax, that's not really a hard drug. You drop a little bit of your mom's Klonopin, probably not much of a hard drug. I don't know. I've never taken Xanax. I've never taken Klonopin. But these pharmaceuticals, these pervasive pharmaceuticals are not necessarily hard drugs, but they do mess up your life. Anyway, alcohol, not a soft drug, possibly not a hard drug, but man, is it a hell of a drug. Because when I woke up the next morning, it was very clear that I had consumed alcohol. This was the first time in a long time that the day after consuming the drug known as alcohol, that I woke up knowing full well, all too well, unforgettably, that I had consumed that drug the preceding evening. It was affecting me physiologically. Did I have a headache? No. But was my head feeling good? No. Did I have a stomach ache? No. But was my stomach feeling good? No. Did I feel that I could perform physically? Yeah, I probably could. I'm an athlete. But at peak physical performance? No. So what's the lesson here? What's the moral? What am I saying? I went out, I drank, I became inebriated, then I went home safely, never drank too much to be behaving irresponsibly, except for maybe accosting strangers in line and asking them whether or not they were patriots. I don't know, that's not irresponsible. I was amicable. Is that a word? Is it amiable? I was both. I think both of those words are words, and I think they mean very similar things. Not only was I amiable, but I was also amicable. The lesson is that alcohol messes you up. Alcohol is a hell of a drug, man. And what I'm trying to do, something I'm really trying to do, is normalize the consumption of drugs. I don't want to demonize the consumption of alcohol. Alcohol, yeah, is it a drug that can harm you severely? Can you become addicted to it? Can it kill you? Can the withdrawal from alcohol kill you? The answer is yes to all of these. So why is it not labeled as a drug? I was watching CBC News when I was home at Christmas in 2019. Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, paid for by the Canadian taxpayer. They're talking about car accidents that are the result of alcohol and drug consumption. What? Maybe alcohol and other drug consumption? The public thinks that alcohol is a great thing to consume and that, I wouldn't do drugs though. If you drink alcohol, you do drugs. That's crazy. Let me say that again. If you drink alcohol, you do drugs. I find it obscene how when people talk about drugs, and typically talk about drugs in a negative light, drugs are talked about negatively. You're not going to go up to your parents and say, hey, I was taking drugs the other day. You're not going to go to your coworkers, your boss, and tell them that I was consuming drugs. At least you probably don't. I find it crazy that drugs includes heroin, methamphetamine, cannabis, psilocybin, LSD. These drugs that will ruin your life and other drugs that have the potential to give you these life-changing experiences that are maybe only possible to reach after decades of meditation practice. You're going to put those drugs in the same category. You're going to put drugs that rot your teeth in the same category as drugs that upon consuming once can help you kick decade-long addictions. Now here's the nature of drugs. They can all be abused. That's true. But how can you put all of these drugs under a single umbrella, an umbrella that has a negative connotation, and somehow alcohol is pushed to the side because of a bit of cultural history? That doesn't make sense to me. Alcohol should be inside of that circle, not alcohol and drugs, maybe alcohol and other drugs. Drugs including alcohol. Drugs, as a standalone term, as a derogatory term, has truly harmed society's perception of many substances which have tremendous powers to benefit individuals and therefore society, when consumed responsibly, of course. What I would like to do is to normalize the consumption of drugs. Do I take drugs? Yes, I take drugs. Do your parents, who consume alcohol and no other recreational narcotics, except for from time to time a little bit of a cigar to get a head rush, do your parents who consume no drugs other than alcohol, do they take drugs? Yes. These people in your life who drink, maybe they have a glass of wine every month. Maybe they sit on the couch and pound back 3, 4, 5 beer a day. Who's keeping track? But people who you know drink, I want you to go up to them. People who just drink, they don't go to raves, they don't take ecstasy at basement clubs in Europe. When I say basement, I mean underground. Say, hey, I was taking some drugs last night. I say, whoa, what? You were taking drugs last night? Like, what do you mean? Are you okay? Say, oh yeah, I'm totally fine. I just had a glass of red wine. I'll say, what? What drugs did you do? I say, no. The wine was the drug. And they'll think for a moment, and then they'll come to realize, well, alcohol is a recreational substance that alters your perception, that alters your mental state, that affects you physiologically, that actually has negative physiological effects. And then they'll realize, yeah, you're right, alcohol is a drug. They might not be able to put puzzle piece 1 together with puzzle piece 2. You might need to explain it. But by all means, explain it, because alcohol is definitely a drug. And it should be put in the category of drugs, because if people come to the realization that they are consumers of drugs, that opens the door of stopping to demonize all other drugs. You could even start talking about classes of drugs. You could talk about stimulants. You could talk about depressants. You could be more specific. Oh, isn't that great? Because it doesn't make sense to talk in the same breath about psychedelics and stimulants in the same way that it doesn't make so much sense to talk about alcohol and milk. They're both liquid. They both hydrate, kind of. Alcohol might be a diuretic. You see what I'm saying? They're disparate enough for it to not be reasonable in most contexts for them to be talked about together. Once people who consume alcohol and alcohol alone, once those people realize that they are consumers of drugs, that opens the gateway for them to realize that it doesn't make sense to demonize all drugs or to lump all drugs under the same banner. We talk about drugs the way we talk about food. Is there a commonality between food? All food? Yes. You eat it. It fills you up. Is there a commonality between drugs? Yes. You consume them, They alter your mental state. Does the commonality between drugs go much further than that? Not really. Some affect you physiologically, some don't. Some are very harmful, some are not. Some can be therapeutic, some not so much. In summary, I do drugs. And you do too. In all likelihood. You might be a devout Muslim. You might just not consume drugs for personal reasons. Both of those very respectable. You might be underage. There are a few of you out there who don't do drugs, but by and large, guess what? You do drugs, and I do too. And that's all right. We do drugs. That's the moral of this podcast. We do drugs. Thank you for listening to The Studio, an entertainment show that is actually still entertaining. Tell your friends about this, tell your parents, tell your coworkers. Tell them that you do drugs and that they do too. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, subscribe, leave a review, drop a rating. If you're listening to this on Spotify, follow. You can follow me on social media on Instagram at Malejczuk, that's my last name, at MALEJCZUK. And I'll catch you next time. This is The Studio with Kristoff Malejczuk.